welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to the Barron Arts Center. My name is Antonia Pancel-Seabreach. I am the Education Chair and plan lectures here. I'm on the commission with the Cultural Arts Commission. I'd like to thank Brandon, who's here with us tonight, for checking everyone in, and Cynthia, who is our director. And I'm thanking all of you on this hot summer day for coming out and, bearing the bad weather and coming to see the history, the origins of American art. So tonight, our presenter, I know everyone knows her, has been here before, Marianne Zalata. She is one of our favorite lecturers on all kinds of art. We've done many series. We did the Grand Museums together. We did French Impressionism. This time we're going to be doing a series on American art, so it's going to go into the spring. So I hope you stay with us. Today is the origins, and continue with us as we go through the next few lectures. And Ms. Zalata received her BA in Art History from Drew University and her Master's at Rutgers. And she's been teaching for over 20 years. She has taught on different cruise ships. So the Seabourn, the Crystal, and the Regent cruise ships. I have to go on one of these cruises with you. I know she's traveled all over the world. I think the last time we spoke, you were going to Antarctica. So she has really been all over the world. And since 2009, she's been teaching at Holyrood, which is the older adult learning program at Rutgers University. So you might want to check that out as well. And without further ado, I welcome Marianne Zalata to talk about the adventures in American art.
Good evening. I'm using this because I sometimes, when I looked at myself on YouTube, it looked like I was being swallowed up by the lectern. So that's the reason why I'm using this. And I don't mean to make myself very tall, but that's the only stool that I had. Before I begin, I'd like you to think about what you did yesterday or today. I can imagine you must have used your ingus flinger an awful lot. Putting on the dishwasher, the clothes washer, putting on the television, answering your phone, starting your car. And sometimes you can get 2 or 3 chores finished in one, if you put the washer on, the dryer on, and you vacuum the furniture back, you've done 3 chores basically in the same amount of time. And I'm pointing this out to you because we're going to talk a little bit at the beginning about the challenges of people who chose to come to the New World and establish themselves. Here I have Maslow's hierarchy. Abraham Maslow was a psychiatrist, and he put together a pyramid of the most basic things are at the bottom, and as you go forward, I've got to put my glasses on now.
You might have to read them out loud.
The physiological needs are most important. Then, of course, is safety and security. And from there, you seek for love and happiness until ultimately you seek for actualization of your life. What are you going to do with your life? How are you going to conduct yourself? What kind of standards do you have? So, in other words, if the bottom thing isn't taken care of, then you cannot possibly think of self-actualization or whatever, because you are so busy with trying to get the basic physiological needs. Now, these were the challenges of the people who came here. The wilderness was unknown to them. There were the vagaries of weather, crop, and livestock failures, and the hostility of the Native Americans. But they managed to wrest a life in an alien place, with all the necessities being made by hand labor by the entire family, even the children. Now, this cannot be comprehended by us today. We have an awful lot of leisure, and I think those early people with the Quakers and whatnot would think that we were kind of lazy. Okay, now, diversions and leisure were not part of their vocabulary. Leisure being a suspect by a society based on fundamentalist puritanical beliefs. Now, The early settlements were theocracies, such as Massachusetts Bay Colony. Images were looked on as idolatry. Individuality and idiosyncrasies were suspect. Think of the Salem witch trials in the 1690s, and think of the fact that all of the Salem witches were women. And they were, as you know, many of them were executed and whatnot. They were put to the fire. I mean, there were no men. It was always the women who were the guilty ones, okay? Now, whoops, my glasses. Oh, sorry. Now, so as I was saying, the 1800s saw a slackening of puritanical hold on communities. The Catholics settled in Maryland and in Georgia. The Quakers went to Pennsylvania. And the Jews went to New York and Rhode Island. Now, this Touro Synagogue, if you've never visited in Rhode Island, you should. It's a beautiful building. The Touro Synagogue was built in 1740. It was the first synagogue, and it was partially financed by Sephardic Jews in New York because the Jews in Rhode Island simply didn't have the money to complete the building. So the Jewish community in New York gave money to the Jews in Rhode Island in order to finish the building. Now also, there was a lack of isolation. There was isolation from Europe and lack of communication. Most settlers came from the trade and farming class, but they had little or no exposure to art. Any artistic talent was stifled by lack of training, lack of tools, and the need for hand labor to produce items of a practical nature. There was no definitive art that emerges immediately from the earliest works that depended on Dutch and English mezzotints. Now, Matthew Bagel, who was one of my professors at Rutgers University, wrote about this early time, quote, "A definitive American look did emerge in the 18th century. Nevertheless, it is most apparent in the repetition of figural poses from one painting to the next," and I will show you that. As American works, they tell us more about the sources of the artist than upon what it was like to be alive in America at that time, unquote. So let's get started. This is called the Freaky Gibbs Limner. It's a brother and sister, Robert and Margaret Gibbs. Now, why do we call them a limner? Someone who limbs, and the word is spelled L-I-M-N, it draws paintings. Now, we do not know who did these two paintings. That's why it's called the Freaky Gibbs Limner. We know he was in probably along the Hudson River, and because you can see even in the floorboards, the black and white tiles were very common in Dutch homes. But the figures themselves are awkward. They are quite flat. If you look at the young boy's hand, I mean, that's an unnatural, you know, it's nobody could hold their hand like that. And they look as if they're pasted to the back of they're pasted to the black curtain behind them. There is very little modeling of the body. The body is flat. There is a sense of a modeling of the face a little bit. For example, he put a little bit of red on the cheeks, but actually it's quite flat, and it doesn't say much about them. All right, now let's go to the next one. Here's another one. This is the Freaky, also John Freaky and his wife with the baby. Now, there's still stiff, awkward figures. The baby looks like she's being held against a board, and there certainly is no animation in her hands or whatever. Now, the emphasis is on line, but it lacks shading. Now, the father has a ruddy face. But the mother's is less that way. And notice his he's got a jacket on with the ruffled cuffs. Notice he's holding a pair of gloves. Why is he holding the gloves? Well, in those days, if you had a pair of gloves, it was really a status symbol. Very, very few people have, today we all have gloves, right? We've got gardening gloves and washing gloves and this kind of gloves, all sorts of gloves. But gloves were a luxury item in the 16th and 17th century. So much of a luxury that the Metropolitan Museum in New York has a pair of white embroidered gloves which were given as a betrothal gift from a man to his fiancée. And they were highly prized. And you will many times see, especially in the works of Rembrandt also, people with gloves in their hands. And this was, as I said, a status symbol. But again, if you look at the man, he's perfectly flat. Perfectly flat. And the wife has very little animation also. And again, they look as if they are kind of pasted on the background. Now, I'm going to show you another one here. This is the Gansevoort Limner. Now, we don't know, we know the name of these two ladies, but we don't know what his name is. It might have been Gansevoort. Now here, similar poses. Now you notice the poses are basically the same. In 1735, he did Miss Van Allen, and Miss Van Allen looked as if her skin was done with chalk. Right? It's very, very unnatural in color. And look at the way she's holding again, he did not understand anatomy. It looks very awkward. And you look at the other one, Susan Truax, well, he's put a little bit more sparkle there in the sense that she's wearing a striped dress. And he has suddenly introduced a little bit of a background. There is a window open with the sky visible. And there is also what looks like a little tea table. Looks a little bit small to me. If she sat down, she'd have to sit very close to the floor, I think, in order to be comfortable. And there were some tea things on the table. But again, it's not giving you any sense of who they are, what kind of life they led, or you're not getting any sense of a personality, shall we say. Now, many of these limners lived along the Hudson River because there was Dutch settlements there, and the Dutch were interested in having their pictures done. Now, here's how many of them worked. During the winter, they would paint the pictures, and in the spring and summer, they would go down the river, going to people's houses. They would show you the pictures without the faces, and you would pick out the one you liked, and then they would put your face on it, okay? So it was kind of like, it really wasn't, you're sitting for a true portrait. All you were doing was sitting with a face. All right, now, even the 19th century artists were sometimes forced to paint signs or houses in order to make a living. All right, now, let's look at this one. This is a Dutch name, a man by the name of Gerrit Ducksink, and we know a little bit about him. Ducksink was a glazier by trade and also is noted as an artist in the roles of the Dutch church in New York City. He must have been successful because tax records of 1695 show that he owned 3 houses in New York City, probably in Lower Manhattan, where, as you know, the Dutch settled. He is one of the 6 or 7 patroon painters who flourished along the Hudson River, painting the wealthy Dutch landowners. Now we see 2 people here, Mrs. Augustus J., and I'm showing you the next one, the portrait of a lady, to show you how his skill continued to grow. Now this Mrs. Augustus J. was shall we say, a socialite, if we can use that word, all right? She was the grandniece of none other than Peter Stuyvesant, and the grandmother of John Jay, who is our first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. So, in other words, she was very, very highly placed in society. Now, we see the similarity of the poses and the accessories. Mrs. Augustus J., again, she's painted very, very white, almost as if he used chalk or just white paint. But by 1710, he trying to create flesh tones in the lady, and he also is trying to create a little bit of motion because there's a drapery over her shoulder, and it looks as if the drapery is blowing in the breeze, and beyond that there is a garden. So he is slowly managing to create a more animated figure, as it were. She is not very animated, okay? And even one of her shoulders is kind of looks higher than the other, all right? Now, the figures themselves, as I said, are awkward, and there is no character revealed at all. Now, here is, by Joseph Blackburn, Mr. and Mrs. Samuel Cutts. Oh my, I keep on losing my eyeglasses here. Oh God. I'm sorry, I keep on losing my eyeglasses, and I'm also losing my speaker here. Sorry. Okay. So, let me see. Mr. and Mrs. Samuel Cutts. Now, if you look at Mr. Cutts first, you will see that there is a view behind him, and he was a trader in the East Indies and also in was in the New Hampshire Assembly. The view shows the sea with one of his ships while he is busy at work. And we see that he looks very elongated, does he not? Looks rather elongated, but we do see that he was obviously very well fed when you look at his stomach, okay? Now, Mrs. Blackburn is painted in the garden, all right? Now, her face is better realized than the other faces that we have seen. Now, there's a fluttering drapery behind her, and she has a lovely dress on. But I went to the Metropolitan last week because I wanted to see some of the American art that I was going to be talking about today. So I went up to this painting. Now you notice that how beautifully the dress is done with the folds, and we have highlights, so you get the idea that it's a silk or a satin dress. Well, I found out that Mrs. Cutts didn't own that dress. The dress appeared on a engraving, and he put that dress on her. He had it. The artist had an engraving that had come from England. A woman was wearing a dress like that, so he painted that dress on her. That's not her dress, okay? And that was not at all unusual if you wanted to have your portrait done and you did not have, you only had homespun clothes with no decoration on it or no fripperies, and you wanted to impress your great-grandchildren, okay? So you would choose to have the dress painted on you even though it was not your dress. Now, let me see. His landscape background, however, was to influence the artist we're going to talk about most this evening, and that's John Singleton Copley. Her picture, as I said, is more alive and more relaxed than her husband's. Now, let's look at another local. This was a local artist. When I say local, he was born in Oyster Bay, Long Island. His name was Robert Feakey. And his father was a minister and a blacksmith. In other words, he had two occupations. He was a blacksmith during the week, and he was a minister on Sunday, all right? His work shows the influence of other artists, such as Smibert. He was taught, and Dr. Hamilton of Annapolis, he was taught by a Dr. Hamilton in Annapolis, Maryland, and he was tolerably well by the force of genius of never having had any teaching. Now, in 1746, he went to Philadelphia, where he painted between 15 to 20 pictures, and it earned him at least 200 pounds, which was a considerable sum of money then. His work shows the emergence of a recognizable American style, strong likeness, elegance, sharply delineated areas of color. Now, when he was in Philadelphia, he did a picture of somebody you'll recognize, Benjamin Franklin. The first portrait of him done when Benjamin Franklin was 40 years old. And you can see that he has opened up the background a little bit. Now, Benjamin Franklin himself still looks quite flat there, right? It still looks like he's kind of attached to the back. But he did put in that a suggestion of clouds and a window on the edge there. This was, again, Benjamin Franklin was 40 years old there. And he had other portraits done. The most famous one, of course, is in Paris, was from Paris. Now, I'm going to show you something else now. Oops. Here. Now, I'm taking the opportunity of showing this to you because, of course, many of you, of those who know, William Dunlap, who is pictured on the right, was born in Perth Amboy. And he lived in Perth Amboy from 1766 to 1777, when the family moved to New York City. His father was a shopkeeper and a veteran of the French and Indian Wars, but he never went home. He stayed in New Jersey, thinking maybe he would have a better opportunity here than just going back and, again, being sent to the wars, okay? Now, the family moved to New York in 1777. Now, if you look closely at that miniature, that's his own miniature. You will notice that one of the eyes, there's something wrong with one of his eyes. He was standing too close to a fire, and a cinder came out and hit him on the side of the eye, which did compromise his ability to paint, especially in delineating the musculature, etc. And he did complain about that in a letter that he wrote. Now, let me see. Okay, so at the age of 17, he was asked to go to Rocky Hill, New Jersey, to paint a portrait of George Washington. That is the earliest portrait of George Washington. Now, after the assault on the Congress in 2021, this is from the New York Times, by the way, in January of 2021, that says, original paintings of George Washington, such as one in the old Senate chamber, are some of the most treasured paintings. We know that many of the works of art were, one of them, they found an empty frame with nothing in it. But this fortunately was in another room so that it was not stolen. This is the earliest portrait of George Washington, and it was done in New Jersey. So but it's in another room so that it's not was not available or was not in any way vandalized. And you can see it's really not the best. He's a little bit flat. He's trying to give some animation to the face. But the rest of it, and it's not a large painting. It's a small one. Okay, it's a very small painting. This is George Washington before Charles Wilson Peale and others got hold of him, and Gilbert Stuart as well got hold of him and painted him. Okay, this is the earliest one. So I wanted to show that to you because it deals with local history. So now, we are going to move into our artist for today, namely John Singleton Copley. He was born in Boston and taught by his stepfather. We believe that his stepfather was a printer and that he had probably come across some things that were sent to him in London, which may have had pictures of engravings of portraits. And that's how he learned to begin his artwork. Now, in 1769, he marries Susanna Clark. She was the daughter of William Clark, who was a merchant in Boston. So he was one of the Boston Brahmins. He was a very successful man. We're going to talk about him again, all right? That's the reason why I'm pointing it out to you. In 1774, the family leaves for Italy and later settles in London. Basically, the Copleys and his father-in-law were loyalists. And there was an awful lot of things going on, as you know, in Boston at this time. And the family decided, Copley decided to take his family and his father-in-law to Italy because he had been told he should go and look at the works of Raphael. So he'd never seen Raphael, so he took his family, they went to Italy, they toured, and he absorbed an awful lot from what he saw in the works of Raphael. And then they decided to settle in London. So I will tell you a little more about that as the lecture progresses, okay? So now, he was made a member of the Royal Academy in 1779, and in his later years, his abilities were diminished and money worries beset him. But he also did pictures of royalty, and I'm going to show you. So he never came back to America because, again, he was a royalist. He wanted to live in England. He wanted a life there. And if you're painting the royal family, why do you have to come back to the United States? There's no reason to do so, okay? Now, I'm going to show you one of his first pictures, done when he was 16 years old. The figures appear flat. There's still a little bit of that flatness. There is no modulation of the body, and lack of color modulation as well. And the shading, although one characteristic of his work emerges, and that is the animation of women's hands. When he does a woman, invariably the hands are doing something, okay? Now, and there she is playing with a pearl necklace. Now you've noticed the hands are rubbery. Look at the man's hands. You do not see you don't see the bones underneath. Now if you hold your hand this way, you've got wrinkles. All of us have wrinkles on our knuckles, don't we? Those hands look like rubber, don't they? Because you don't see those wrinkles. So that looks unnatural. Plus the fingers are very long and it just doesn't look right, okay? So he still hasn't mastered that yet. Of how to create that shading and those lines on the fingers. Now, but there is a landscape background present and will be developed to set off the figure from the background. And even the wife looks rather flat. So, all right, now, this is a painting this is a copy. He saw a painting in, this is 1754 also. Somehow he must have gotten a print of the Galatea, the going through the water. And this was it was no doubt a mezzotint, but this was his reproduction of it. Now it's a good attempt at a very complex series of figures, textures, and tones. It is awkward when compared to the original, but still, this is quite a feat for someone to try. This plethora of figures, and look at the sky. He's gotten a very good job with the sky because it's the blue, and then there's a little bit of a gold there, like as if the sun is coming up. And there's the water, the texture of the water. Look at that drapery, the texture of the drapery, and the idea that the drapery is being blown as they go through the water. So it's a really very, very good for, again, a 16-year-old child, a 16-year-old boy, okay, who has had no training whatsoever, except what he can copy when he sees something and he copies it. Now, this is what the Galatea by Van... Wait a minute. I thought I had... Wait a minute. There's Van Loo's Galatea. There is the Van Loo one. Here is his. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. This is the one. I am very sorry, people. I'm having problems with this. All right. This is Copley's Galatea. And you can see that it works quite well. Again, we're talking about the water, the fact that he is borne along on the water, and all the people, there were horses in the water, and there are the river gods and whatnot, and he did a very good job of it. This is the one, I'm sorry, this is the one by Van Loo that he copied. So it shows that he was trying very, very much to imitate the art of Europe. Now, here is another one, Anne Ting from 1756. He was there 18 years old when he did this. Note the highlights on the costume. He's starting to get the highlights on the dresses and the folds, okay? And he also he's given her something with her hands. She's a shepherd. And she's feeding, as you can see, a lamb. Now that's kind of a different thing. And we also see that he has created a background for her. She looks to be as if she's sitting in front of a tree, near a tree trunk, and behind her there is a forest, a glade, and also the variegated sky, as you can see. So he gives her a little bit of animation with the lamb and the shaft. Now, but we still see those rubbery hands, don't we? They're still not quite anatomically correct, but they will get better. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, I skipped again. All right, now this is Mary and Elizabeth Royale, done in 1758. Isaac Royale was a very, very wealthy sugar planter who left the islands and came with his family, his wife, his children, and about approximately 20 to 27 slaves he brought with him to live in Boston. Now, he was a Boston aristocrat, as I said. He had emigrated from Antigua, had quite a bit of money, and he funded a chair at Harvard Law School. Now, here are his two daughters. They are elegantly done in silk and lace, probably imported and thus expensive. There is a red velvet drapery. Now, you could see it's velvetized because of the, wait a minute here. This indicates that it's probably velvet, because velvet has a tonal quality like that. If you have some velvet something at home, it has a tonal quality like this. And these two young ladies are seated on a sofa. She is holding a bird, and she is petting a King Charles Spaniel. All right, they put the first time you see the dog in the family. Now, they are depicted as cultured, well-bred women who were destined to make brilliant marriages. The younger one, Mary, on the right, married a Mr. Pepperell married in 1775 to a William Pepperell. Now, William Pepperell was an Englishman, and he had to go. They were married about a year, and she was pregnant with her first child, and he had to go to England, and he stayed there for about a year, trying to arrange. He had business there, in other words, okay? And he came back, and they had 3 more children. But I want to get this straight now. During the Revolution, Elizabeth had the last child was a boy named William, and 2 months later, Elizabeth died. As you well know, maternal mortality was really bad in those days, okay? Now, it was said that she died of dysentery when the food ran short in Boston because of a boycott of British goods, leaving 4 children. Now, that may or may not be true. She might have died of typhoid. She might have died of whatever, because when you died, the doctor came and he would make a judgment on what you died of, but it was generally not accurate, and certainly not as accurate as it would be today. Now, her sister married also, and they went to Halifax, Nova Scotia, and from there they went back to England. Again, they were also royalists, so they went back. Now, I'm going to touch on Elizabeth's life again in a few minutes, all right? Because remember, Copley did these paintings when they were young ladies. Now, this is the first Copley that is considered a masterpiece, and look at Epps Sargent's hand. He finally got the hand right? It looks like the hand of a middle-aged man, not a young man, a middle-aged man. But he leans very casually on the stand there, and he looks quite self-confident. And behind him, you can again see the sky and some trees and the variegation of the sky. In other words, the sky is blue, but then the sun must be settling, because you can generally see sunsets like that in the summer, don't you? And just before the sun disappears, you have this lovely pink. Well, there it is for you. And this is considered, and look at the hair too. The hair looks very lively, right? The hair is lively, and he's looking directly at us, and he looks like, well, he looks like a guy to be reckoned with, doesn't he? So this is considered really his very first masterpiece. Now the plinth stone, of course, refers to his stability. Something, when you put something like that in, it variably refers to the person or to the milieu. And the body has a solidity of it. The body is no longer flat. We know that we believe his arm is correct. All right, the arm is correct. The arm is leaning. He's got a couple of wrinkles on the jacket. So he has looked at all the nuances of the painting. Whoops, again, I went for, now here is another copy, Anne Bowler from 1763. The richly textured, even to the wrinkles in the dress, because there are a number of wrinkles right here, number of wrinkles. But we see also the lace, that she's a long flow of lace, and if you notice, she is standing on a parapet, and there's a red curtain drawn up with a tassel. Now that was a Baroque. In Baroque paintings, that was probably, you will always see that, almost always see that in a Baroque painting. So obviously Copley must have seen or gotten a print of something, and it showed a drapery like that, and so he reproduced it there. She is also on looks like a parapet. And there's a tree here. Here's again a stone column, and she is holding a garland of flowers. Again, always the lady is always doing something with her hands. Now, and she also has a bonnet on with a little clasp there. Now, so and look at her skin. Finally, he's gotten the skin tone correct for a woman, and beautifully done, absolutely beautiful. Now, I want you to look at this. Look at the difference between Anne Bowler in 1763 and Anne Ting in, wait a minute here. I should have given my thing, all right. All right, and Anne Ting in 1756. There's a big difference, and you can see it. It's obvious how he has managed to recreate the figure as a believable figure. And the animation, the light falling on the figure, and it's truly, truly wonderful. Now, let me see. Okay. All right. Now, here is Mrs. James Warren. And Mrs. James Warren is wearing quite a dress. First of all, it has the Watteau train on the back, very fashionable in the 18th century. So obviously he must have seen pictures of like that, because she's got the Watteau train, she's got the sleeves, she's walking in a garden, all right, past the rose bushes, and making quite a spectacle of. I mean, she's really looks spectacular in that. Truly does. Look at just the way the dress goes, and the Watteau train gives her a sense of motion. She's walking that way, but the train is dragging behind her. So you have a sense of motion there. Now, I want to show you something else. This is a close-up of that lace on her dress. Now that looks like a high definition picture, doesn't it? It really looks high def. First of all, it's a double layer of lace, and it is sheer. But where the elbow is, the lace has bunched up, and it's no longer sheer. And it's this huge swath of lace. Basically, he's showing off. But he's showing off his skill, because if he shows that kind of skill, guess what? He's going to get an awful lot of customers, right? Okay, that's what he wanted. Now, it is absolutely exquisite, and to look at the way this lace is done, this probably is a piece of lace from France. Most probably it is. Now, whether or not that was her dress, I don't know. But even if it was in a picture, he has managed to replicate it masterfully. Just absolutely wonderful. That's the reason why I showed that. And of course, it's in the front of the painting. So when a woman saw that, she said, I want to go to this guy. It's fabulous. You know, just how he learned to do that. And again, it's a double lace, and just the netting here and the flowers, it's unreal. It must have taken him a month to do that, seriously. And don't forget, they didn't have very good light in those days. It was a candle light. Or during the day, of course, you could open the window or sit by the window. But that would have been very, very difficult to execute, given the lighting that they had in those days. All right. So now here is Henry Pelham. Henry Pelham was John Copley's half-brother. So he painted him in, I am looking for the, all right. He painted him, he was about 15 or 16 years old, and he looks that red swath of drapery again, right? Just pulls it right back, and it frames the boy. But I want you to look at the table. Copley became very famous for the reflections on the table, the table, which of course had been buffed. He's there with a pet squirrel, and kids did keep pet squirrels in those days, okay? I'm going to show you, because I'll show you another one. And look at the reflections from that table. It's absolutely phenomenal. It truly, truly is just wonderful to think that he could master that without having had any kind of training at all. All right, let's look at the next one. Now, here is somebody to reckon with, isn't she? Look at her face. Her name is Mrs. George Watson. She is wearing this gorgeous fuchsia dress, and she's putting something on the shelf there. But she looks at us, and she looks like somebody you'll never be able to fool her. You will never be able to fool her. Look at her face. He has given her this marvelous character. She must have been she must have been quite a character, and he decided to just give her this very straightforward look. And I'm a Yankee from Boston, and you can't fool me. And I love her. I absolutely adore her. And again, working with the hands, she's got something in her hands. Okay. And here is Mr. and Mrs. John Hancock. Now, this painting was done in 1765 and 1772. And it was showing Mr. Hamilton and his wife, and I'm looking now for the paper. All right, here it is. Okay, yeah, here it is. All right. John Hancock's father died when he was 7 years old. He was adopted by his uncle, a very wealthy trader. A Harvard-trained lawyer, he worked in his uncle's office in both Boston and in London as well. In 1764, Hancock inherited the uncle's business. Copley shows him at his work. The rose drapery unites him and his wife on the right. But then, there again, this is the beginning of the American look. You would never, well, you might have seen, when the English painted their aristocrats, the aristocrats were never doing anything. And it looks like John Hancock is looking through a law book and is going to turn the page and take some notes. That is very unusual, all right? And Copley exploited this. You're going to see it as we go along in the lecture. And this is now, if you look at Mrs. Hancock, of course, she's a lady of leisure. And if you look, she's got her elbow on the table, and you see the reflection of the elbow on the table? Right there, there's a little bit of that reflection, okay? Now, they are shown to be people of substance. Yet Copley did not shy of painting Hancock at work, something we would not see, as I said, in an aristocratic portrait. His wife's name, by the way, was Dorothy Quincy. Again, she was one of the Boston Brahmins. She may have come from Quincy, Massachusetts. Was known to be a level-headed beauty, polite with all the domestic skills, according to what John Adams said. In his writings, he talks about people, all right? She had all the domestic skills. They married in 1775, and when Hancock died, his estate was valued at $350,000 when he died, one of the wealthiest men in Boston. Now here's another pair of portraits. This is Mr. and Mrs. Nicholas Boylston in 1767. Now there is a Boylston Street in Boston, right? Sure. He was a wealthy benefactor of Harvard. He was a Tory. John Adams was awed at the magnificence of his home. John Adams would always make comments, but I do not know the world, and oh, to have a house like that. He was a very jealous man. He was jealous of anybody that had $1 more than he did. Okay. Boylston endowed a Harvard chair with a 1,500-pound dowry to Harvard. Copley painted him twice in this garb known as a banyan. Now, why is he dressed like that? He looks almost like the Sheik of Araby, doesn't he? Well, this was fashionable at the time. When a Boston gentleman came in after work, whatever he did, he would take off his jacket and he would put on what looked like a duster coat on. And the reason for the hat, or the what looks like a turban, may very well have been that it was cold in the house. I mean, those fireplaces didn't really generate the kind of heat that we know, and his head might have been cold, so you put that on. But he would be at his leisure there, and if someone came to visit him, he'd say, "Oh, come on, let's sit down and have a glass of wine or whatever," and he would keep this banyan on. Now notice how very self-confident he is. He's very, in other words, he's wearing what looks like I said, like a turban, but he's very self-confident. Just the way he sits, looking out at us. He's obviously in one of his, and again, look at the red drapery. We remember that has become one of his signatures as well. And then on the right, you see his wife. Now, he is, as I said, self-assured, looks perfectly at home. But the Boston Brahmins wanted to imitate the English aristocratic style of life. Today, Ralph Lauren promotes that look. But in those days, Copley promoted the look, okay? In the distance is one of his ships, because he was, again, a merchant who would buy things from Europe and bring it over, and he may have been a go-between, he may have had 2 or 3 stores, but he was a businessman in that way. Now, the wife is a perfect foil for a successful man such as he, as she strolls through the garden with a flower basket. In other words, showing she is a lady of leisure. She is not doing the family laundry. Now, the next one. This is another true American portrait. There is Paul Revere in his shirt sleeves working at his craft. The work is not denigrated, rather it enhances the man and his personality. You would never see a portrait like this done in England. It would always be the gentleman just sitting there. Well, I don't work with my hands. That's for a craftsman to work with his hands, all right? Now, again, Copley has mastered the reflections on the table. Look at you see his shirt. You can, if you look closely at that teapot he's holding, you can also see the reflection of the fingertips on the teapot. You can see the reflections here of his hand. You see the reflection right there? There it is. I mean, absolutely masterful. And showing him as an established craftsman who was recognized and who was emulated and who was very, very popular in Boston. Now, note the pause and the reflective nature of Revere, as if he's stopping for a minute to consider the engraving of the teapot with the pineapple finial, and you know the pineapple finial is a symbol of his hospitality. Sometimes people have them above their house, the finial, right? Okay, so there he is, a successful man, and it's successful enough that the primary painter of Boston is doing his portrait. Now, let's see now. Now, in 1770, there was the Boston Massacre, and there was a number of different engravings, and they showed one showing the death of Crispus Attucks, copied from an engraving by Henry Pelham, Copley's half-brother. Copley's half-brother made a drawing of the Boston Massacre. Revere's work in making copper sheeting for he also made copper sheeting for the USS Constitution and for Fulton's steamboat, the Clermont. In other words, he was basically a metal worker, but he made the sheathing for the USS Constitution. So he must have had quite a foundry to do that, and it was done with copper, of course. All right, now, this one. This is not, the next one I'm going to show you is not by Copley. It's by another man. But it's one of my favorite paintings, and you really should take a look at it. Its name is Elijah Boardman from 1789. He was a Revolutionary War hero. He was a dry goods merchant and a Connecticut senator. It's life-size. The painting is 83 inches high by 51 inches wide. It always hung at eye level, but when I went to the Met last week, they had raised it so you have to look all the way at the ceiling. And that was, I don't know who thought of that wonderful idea to do that. It's one of the most fabulous paintings I've ever seen. I absolutely adore it. Now, we're going to talk about this. We see here a man with an aristocratic demeanor and dress shown at work. This guy's actually working, huh? Now, standing at his desk in front of what would be considered a writer's desk, there is a series of books. The books are the volumes, because I looked at the painting close enough and I was able to parse out what type of books they were. There were the works of Shakespeare, Milton, Johnson's Dictionary, and something called the London Magazine, which all attest to his learning and being a man of the world and being able to afford volumes like that. He looks at us directly with pride and self-assurance that does not come from being an aristocrat, but from success and achievement. The dry goods stock, the door to the shop is open. You can see one door open, and the other door is also open, showing his stock of goods. Now, that fabric in there, which is striped, embroidered, etc., would not have originated in our country. We still did not have the skill to put for fabric like that, that fabric had to come from Europe, either France or possibly England. Now, the dry goods are seen in the background, and the elegance of fabric shows that he catered to wealthy patrons. Now, there is, and by the way, one of the little bolts there has a little tag on it, how much it costs, and it was 3 shillings, probably 3 shillings a yard, okay, which was quite a bit of money then, I think. Now, notice also the interplay of light and shadow on the floor. You see, for example, look at this, look at this, look at this. You see the open door, and look at his clothes. First of all, he's got a fob, a key fob there, all right? He is wearing silk stockings, and I can guarantee you they came from France. How do I know that? Well, when Thomas Jefferson was in Paris, Abigail Adams and her daughter needed stockings, and he would send them their silk stockings from Paris. That's why I am quite sure and look at the highlights on it. You know it's silk. It's not polyester, people, okay? And of course, look at the shoes with the very nice buckles on it. So in other words, it oozes. It just is absolutely fabulous. And that's an American painting. Somebody self-assured, successful, ready to take on the world. And that is what sets us apart from the aristocrats of England who had their pictures done. But a workman would never have his picture done. So, but I had to bring this in because I thought it was very, very important at this point. So this is, we are creating an American art of our own. Now here is Copley's, a picture again of a little boy, Daniel Verplanck from 1771. Another pet squirrel, all right, quite at home with the animal who was crawling up his leg. This was done in New York, singled out by Dunlap as a work of exceptional quality, who quotes William Dunlap, talked to this man, exceptional quality, who quotes his son as having the work in his possession. William Dunlap spoke to the son, and the work was when he was already a grown boy, still in his possession. Today it's at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, okay? Set against a dark background, the sun appears to be setting, yet the light comes on the boy's face from the left. Now, one thing that's a little odd, his head looks a little bit too big for his body, doesn't it? Just a little bit of that, yeah. And he looks quite tiny and quite thin. Now the boy gives us a sidelong look, sitting there very composed. But this also is at the Met, and naturally it was done in New York, so it probably was stayed with the family for a number of generations before it went to the Met. All right, now look at this. Here's Sam Adams. This was commissioned by John Hancock, because Sam Adams, who owned a bar, was not spending any time at the bar and wasn't making a tavern, and wasn't making very much money, because he was all of a sudden part of the shall I say, mob in Boston that decided that we had better separate from England. And there he is, pointing to something, all right? Now, Adams didn't pay for this painting because he didn't have the money. As I said, it was commissioned by Hancock. John Hancock wanted there to be a picture for posterity of Sam Adams. Now, he was the one who confronted the Royal Governor Hutchinson the day after the Boston Massacre to demand the removal of the British troops, which didn't happen. Copley highlights his head and his hands with a dark background, which almost blends into the suit. In other words, he was working with his hands, but he was also using his head. The turn of the head and the placement of the figure has a very, very dramatic impact. He's pointing, the desk is filled with papers, pointing to the papers and looking off to one side and pointing to the papers. Look at what I'm doing here, okay? Okay, now, The next one. This is Mr. and Mrs. Ralph Izard. Now, I'm going to take you to going back to Copley. Copley went to Italy because somebody told him, you should go to Italy to go see the Raphaels. So he packed up his entire family, including his father-in-law. We're going to talk about that a little more today. And they toured. They went to Italy, where Copley went to Pompeii, Herculaneum, Naples, went to the art gallery, saw the works of Raphael, etc. Then he returned to Rome when this work was completed. Now, this work was Ralph Izard and his wife, who accompanied Copley and his wife to Italy. Ralph Izard was a planter. He lived in South Carolina, and when Thomas Jefferson was in Europe, he found some rice. It was a new variety of rice. And Thomas Jefferson always said, it's important for us to be able to find new crops. So he sent that rice to Ralph Izard and said, Ralph, why don't you try this variety of rice from Italy? I don't know what happened, but anyway, that's the story. Now, Izard and his wife traveled with Copley. So when Copley did the painting of them, he painted in the figures here in the back. In the background, we see two Roman statues. We see a Roman building here. Look at the elaborate table they're sitting at. That's the kind of table you would have found in Europe in the 18th century. And indeed, they may very well have bought it, and Copley decided to put it in the picture, okay, and use it. And now, also notice the red drapery. The Baroque touch is still there, okay? And notice that there was an urn here. Well, this is the kind of urn you would find in Italy, an Etruscan urn like that. And so, in other words, he was putting in the elements of Italy. Now, there's a little bit more I want to tell you about Ralph Izard. In 1777, Ralph Izard went to Europe because he was named the deputy to Tuscany. The American government at that time, well, government, if you know what I mean, was trying to get this man to go to Tuscany to try to get some trade from Italy to the United States. So when he arrived in Paris, he went to see Benjamin Franklin, and Benjamin Franklin gave him the funds to go to Tuscany. He comes back about a month later and he said, Benjamin, I need some more money. Well, he said, so Benjamin Franklin said to him, Ralph, I gave you the money. You didn't go. I'm not going to give you any more money, because Benjamin Franklin was acutely aware that he was responsible for the money that the Continental Congress had given him, and it was not to be squandered on somebody who decided 3 weeks later that 3 or 4 weeks later that he wanted to go. So that's just a little aside about Ralph Izard. I wanted you to know that. Now here is a close-up of his picture, of his wife's picture. All right, she was. Her name was Alice Delancey. Delancey Street in New York. All right, she was a New York lady from New York, obviously a society lady. All right, and he married her, and then they went to his plantation in South Carolina. Now, the next picture I'm going to show you. Remember, the Copleys and the Izards went together to Europe. The Izards came back to the United States, but Copley set himself up in London, because Copley's picture of his half-brother was sent to England, and when Sir William, when the head of the Royal Academy in London saw the picture, he said, this man should come to England and paint here. So Copley decided that after the trip to Italy, he was going to settle in London, and because he was a royalist, and so was his father-in-law. Now, I'm going to show you the picture of the family. And I'm going to explain to you what actually happened. Copley's stands behind his father-in-law, Richard Clark. The daughter, Betsy, the little one, is 6 years old, stands very seriously in the front, while the mother, Susanna, hugs John, who is 4 years old, and Mary, who is 3 years old. Meanwhile, the baby is being held, squirming with the rattle, and the grandfather looks a little bit nonplussed. What do I do with the baby, you know? Now, and you see a domestic note with the doll being thrown on the floor. Otherwise, this is a perfect example of English aristocratic portraiture. Now, there is another good reason why they settled in England. And I'm going to get the notes here. All right. In 1773, there were 3 ships that came to Boston between November 27th and December 15th. They were the Dartmouth, the Eleanor, and the Beaver. Now, they all docked at Griffin's Wharf, and the rule was within 20 days of entering the harbor, the goods had to be unloaded and the duty paid. Now, these 3 boats were filled with chests of tea. And we know that the tax on tea was not rescinded by the British. And this irked everybody, especially the people in Boston, all right? So, on December 16th, armed men with weapons pretending to be Indians, all right, unloaded the 342 chests of tea and dumped it all into the water. And William Clark was one of the people, one of the traders who had bought the tea. There were a number of men, and they almost probably went bankrupt because you had to pay for the stuff first. You also had to pay for it to come across the ocean, which took about 5 or 6 weeks, and then you would sell it, and you would add a tax to it, and there was no tea. Again, it was 342 chests of tea, and the value of it at that time was 9,659 British pounds. Now, just this week, I found out what the real value of all that tea was in our currency right now. The value of that tea was $1,408,826. It was basically $1 million heist of tea. And many of the men who were the brokers, the go-betweens, lost their money. The tea's in the water. The leaves are floating. How are you going to resuscitate that? You can't bring it back. So this is the reason why they settled there. Copley was very successful, and I will show you that because we're going to look at some of his paintings that he did for the king. He suddenly became the king's painter. Not a bad deal for a little guy from Boston, right? Here, well, this one first. Brooks Watson and the Shark. I've got to show you this one. There were 3 versions of this painting, and it recounts a 1749 incident of a man named Brooks Watson swimming in Havana Harbor who was attacked by a shark and lost part of his leg. This history painting recounts his rescue. The Met version, the one of the Metropolitan, is partially unfinished but is believed to be by Copley's hand. The 2 figures reaching for Brooks Watson, who was in the water, come from a Raphael cartoon called The Draft of Fishes. And it's very unusual because there is a black man and a white man trying to rescue poor Brooks Watson. Now, nature pitted against man was a 19th century theme, and there's a great sense of immediacy and drama, not expressions of horror or the unusual inclusion of a black man to the rescue. This is the grand scale, 200 years before Jaws. High drama and terror detailed and an explanation at the bottom of the painting. There is a very large explanation about what happened here. Okay, so Brooks Watson, and there were a number of copies, and one of them is in the National Gallery in Washington, one is in Boston, and one is in New York as well. Okay, now the next picture. Remember I told you about Mary and Elizabeth Royale? Well, as I told you, Elizabeth died. Her husband, being a loyalist, decided to take the family back to England. They had a business there, and they had money. He had quite a bit of money. Came from an aristocratic family. So he decided to go back. Now, the youngest baby was 2 months old when they went back, all right? And Elizabeth had died, I believe, in 1774. And 4 years later, William Pepperell, who absolutely adored his wife, he never remarried, asked Copley to do a family portrait, but putting in his dead wife, Elizabeth. Now, Copley knew what she looked like when she was a teenager, so he must have just kind of worked with that, and I don't know if that face is accurate, but that is William looking down at Elizabeth, and it was the posthumous portrait. Copley may have done the portrait from memory, or maybe there was a miniature that had been painted. I don't know. But he was inspired by Reynolds and Gainsborough, who placed their subjects in a garden with puffy drapery, presenting it as a harmonious family scene. The two little girls play skittles, while the father leans toward the boy, William, who is his heir. There was also a family dog. There's Fido, right down there in the corner, as the other Royale picture also had a dog, which completes the domestic scene. Pepperell was still in mourning for his wife. He was in exile in England and was having financial difficulties. Even after he married Elizabeth, he left her a few months later to go to England to try to straighten out his business. Meanwhile, she was pregnant and she had the baby, and when he came back to Boston, the baby had already been born. All right, now here is another picture. This is the death of the Earl of Chatham. In 1779, the Earl of Chatham rose to speak against a proposal by the Earl of Richmond to ask the king to end the war in America. After Richmond's reply, Chatham rose, put his hand on his chest, and collapsed on April 7th. He died a month later. He had obviously a bad heart attack. Copley's history picture here shows the participants dressed in their official garbs, those red robes, okay? This is the House of Lords, after all, okay? Which is not the way they were dressed when this incident happened. They were just wearing regular street clothes. Now, history is thus prettied up for posterity. Copley knew this was going to be a very important portrait. And by the way, every one of those faces is accurate. He did not just make this up. He obviously went to all of these lords and painted their faces, and he then put them into the picture so that all the people in the work are identifiable. There is a key posted in the National Gallery in London, and you can read who is who in each of those people and who they are. West was the first to put history painting in contemporary dress also. All right, now the next few paintings I'm going to show you are the paintings he did for George III of England. Now, here are the daughters of George III in 1785. And here we have the influence of Benjamin West, someone we will talk to in our future lectures, who got Copley this royal commission because Benjamin West was close to the other artists in London, and he managed to get this commission for John Singleton Copley. Now, Mary here, one of the daughters, plays a tambourine. There she is. and amuses Amelia while Sophie plays and the dogs jump exuberantly. And the round tower of Windsor Castle can be seen in the background. Notice there is a break between the trees, and you can see the tower, Windsor Castle, in the background. All textures were faithfully rendered. Copley took special pains of this work because he wanted to please the king, naturally. And when it was exhibited, it was thought to be too ebullient, but it really captured children naturally at play. I mean, you know, he didn't want to sit them down. They were playing, so he wanted to paint the kids that way. But people didn't like it because it was much too exuberant. Kids are exuberant, right? Okay. Now, the next one here, I don't believe I'm going to have to tell you who he is. The Earl of Spencer, one of Diana's ancestors, probably her great-great-great-great-grandfather, okay? He's also the brother of the famous Georgiana Spencer, whom I do a lecture on, but not with this series, but with another series, and the ancestor of Princess Diana. He was the first Lord of the Admiralty. Now, that post was held by Winston Churchill in the 20th century. He was a very scholarly man, and he amassed a library at Althorpe, still the home of Diana's ancestral home, of 40,000 books, including the Gutenberg Bible and 4 of Shakespeare's folios. Then, of course, those folios and the Gutenberg Bible, you can't put a price on it. You really can't. You realize that. 40,000 books. So you must know the wealth of those people if they could afford to buy 40,000 books. Now, the last picture I'm going to show you is the Prince of Wales. This was done in 1809. The Prince of Wales gestures toward a regiment of light dragoons. In 1810, it was exhibited to unfavorable reviews. There is some overpainting on it. They removed the epaulets. Now, the English, prior to the early 1700s, the English didn't use epaulets because they thought it was too French. It was too Frenchified to put epaulets. But then they put the epaulets on. And, you know, it had the braid and whatnot. It was lovely. But then they take it off. You know, these uniforms, they were everything they have, whether it be the sword or the epaulets or the buttons, everything means something. And that's the reason why when Prince Philip or would appear at certain occasions, he would be dressed in a military uniform. But even the sash means something. The fringe means something. Because I've done some research, I had to go to the Greenwich Library in England to do some research on a painting of mine of a sailor. And my God, it's unbelievable. It really is. But they were very nice at me in the library. I introduced myself. I said I had come from America and I would like to do some research on this man. I had a picture there. And they said, oh, would you like to be a member of our library? They made me a member of the library. And I got a library card from the Greenwich Maritime Museum in Greenwich, England. I am a member, which is like, I was so thrilled. You had no idea. It was really, really nice. I think it was so unusual when they see an American lady come to do research and sitting there all day long. They must have thought that was kind of unusual. But it was so nice. I was so pleased. You know, things like that, when you travel and something like that happens, it just makes your day, doesn't it? It really does. It's wonderful. Okay, so this was not very well liked. Now, in 1811, they replaced on the right shoulder, they replaced the epaulets, they removed the epaulets and put an aiguillette on that shoulder. The hat and the feather and the Order of Garter, the blue ribbon was repainted. The blue ribbon is the Order of the Garter, okay? Critics thought the Prince of Wales was overly large, while the figures behind him were too diminutive. This composition references equestrian portraits of both Rubens and Van Dyck. Van Dyck did many portraits of the King of England. He came to England and he stayed there because Charles loved his work. Okay, so if you have a patron, you're not going to leave if they keep on giving you commissions. So anyway, thank you for coming. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.